Okay, good morning everyone. It is now 9:30 and so I resume the hearings. Carol, if perhaps you could do the housekeeping announcements for us.
Good morning. As usual, there's no scheduled fire alarms for during the inquiry, so if the alarm does sound, can you make your way to the nearest exit and gather on the corner of Claremont Terrace outside the GMB building, which is to your left as you go out of the main doors. Do not stop and retrieve any belongings, but exit the building as quickly and safely as possible following the green fire exit routes. And do not enter the building until a fire marshal or member of the fire service tells you it's safe to do so. Please only use the main doors at the front of the building, and for security purposes do not use the side doors unless you're a wheelchair user and someone is available to unlock and relock the door after you. Just to make people aware, there are other users in the building as there are language classes going on at the same time. The toilets are situated on the ground floor and the corridor at the back at the side there. There's water available for everyone, including people who are up in the gallery. There's water available in the foyer for them. Other refreshments are available in Gillygate, there's a series of coffee shops and places to eat, and there's also Sainsbury's, Express and Bootham. As normal, the proceedings are being filmed and will be put on YouTube, so if anyone has any concerns about being filmed, if you let me know and I can place you in a location where you won't get picked up on camera. The Wi-Fi details are Citadel Guest and the password is General Booth 1883, and the details are written down either side of the room there. Right, thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Carol. Many faces around the table this morning are familiar to us all, but having said that, I think it might just be helpful today to have a very brief introduction. So if I could start in the Council's corner.
So, odd to say this after last week, but David Elvin KC and Scott Liners KC and Matt Henderson for the Council.
I'm John Keys. I'm an international partner at Cushman & Wakefield, advising the Council on property matters regarding the university.
Sarah Dolmaid, Local Planning Project Officer.
Jane Healy-Brown, Director at Arab, on behalf of the Council on Greenbelt Matters.
Dave Merritt, York Labour Party.
Michael Corsier for Fulford Parish Council.
James Langler, Historic Planning Advisor at Historic England.
Rose Hilton, Heslington Parish Council.
Richard Bramley, Heslington Parish Council. Mark Waters, Osborne, we can do Wentworth.
Tim Waring, Quad for LDP.
Mrs Harvey Dowdy, Director of Technology, Estates and Facilities at the University of York.
Charlie Jeffrey, Vice-Chancellor of the University of York.
Stephen Nicol from Nicol Economics, working for the university.
Janet O'Neill, Planning Consultant for the university.
Paul Tucker, and with the same heavy heart as Mr Elvin, King's Council. There you go. Can I also say, sirs, that we will be joined by Lucy Markham from Montague Evans, whose train arrives shortly to deal with matters with regards to the historic environment, who no doubt sits at the end somewhere. Thank you.
The East Coast trains have been in a state of chaos since yesterday due to signal failure at Peterborough, as my hanging around King's Cross for several hours last night demonstrated, and I imagine others have had the same problems.
Okay, yeah, that's no problem. Obviously, anyone that's been held up is, of course, more than welcome to join us when they arrive.
Thank you, sir.
Basically, the procedure. I think you'll all be familiar with the procedure now for the hearings by now. But in essence, it will be based around a structured discussion that we will lead as the discussion and the debate goes on. If there's something that you wish to contribute, please append your nameplate and we'll bring you into the discussion at an appropriate point. Are there any questions about the procedure? Okay, good. In which case, then, let us get down to it. And we are today, as hopefully you're all aware, on matter 2, which is about the University of York. So the way that we're going to deal with this is to, first of all, how we're going to structure the day, is to first of all hear from the council and the university so that we can understand precisely what is agreed between them and what is not explicitly not agreed between them, just so that we've got an understanding of that first of all, and then to take a step back and to look at the whole issue of the proposed allocation, etc., in the round and from more sort of the fundamental starting point. But first of all, really, it's quite important that we understand what there is between the council and the university. So, Mr. Elvin.
Would it help if I introduced the modifications that we proposed and the statement of common ground, which I think you should have signed now?
Yeah, absolutely. And just while you're addressing that, one question I had in my mind was whether or not the statement of common ground was drawn up and signed on the basis of those main modifications, whether they informed it.
Yes. Yes, and although Historic England maintains its objection to the allocation, Historic England was consulted on the modifications, and Mr. Tucker and I had a continuing dialogue during August, so the university were well aware where we were coming from, and they fed comments in which were reflected in the drafting. And I appreciate that doesn't bind other parties, but it's been done in full consultation during the course of the summer. If I can introduce you to the main policies, they are set out in full, along with adjustments to the proposed adjustments to the text in Appendix 2 to our hearing statement. They're also in the volume of Phase 3 modifications, which is a cumulative. ED1 begins at page 115, and obviously it's followed by ED2 and ED3. And can I just explain what's been done? Looking at the policies, it seemed there was a lot of overlap and not entire consistency between them, and it was better to put the main guiding principles into ED1 and then simply to avoid repetition in ED2, which deals with the West Campus, and ED3, which deals with the East Campus. There is a need for care because the West Campus has got heritage implications, in particular given some of the heritage assets within the site, and that is also reflected in the redrafting. I should say that the policies don't seek to change in substance on the redraft the principles that were applicable earlier. The only change of significance, other than putting it in a more ordered format, is the removal of the 23% built footprint. And for those who want further explanation of that, Mr. Linus, Mr. Henderson and I produced a note which is in Appendix 3 to the hearing statement, which explains why the 23% was no longer an appropriate figure. That's not to say the policies give free rein to any built development. There are general principles such as heritage implications, the landscape character of the campus and the like, all of which have to be taken, and other factors, all of which have to be taken into account. But it gives much greater freedom in terms of no artificial constraint on built footprint for proposals to come forward without being in breach of policy simply by virtue of the amount of space being sought. And so that's basically the reason the policies have been redrafted. You'll see that matters such as car parking, and I know a particular concern to Fulford, the 15% reference remains. I can't remember where it is now. It's in one of the policies. I think it's S22. S22 itself, which is the allocation policy, is in our Appendix 1, but it's also in the schedule at pages 53 and following. Yes, the 15% of sustainable trips requirement remains in S22, and I know Fulford were particularly concerned about that in their hearing statement. and S22 requires any development within that extension site to be subject to the ED1 overriding principles, and also a number of additional requirements, transport, junctions, etc., which are set out there. The terms of those policies, as you'll see from the Statement of Common Ground, are agreed with the university, with two narrow exceptions. The first is we were asked to enlarge the language at the end of ED1, which is on page 116 of the composite schedule, which says facilities for sport and essential operations to support this and for landscaping adjacent to Campus West, Campus East and ST27 may be located within the Greenbelt if they are appropriate development, preserve the openness of the Greenbelt and meet the above criteria. And that we consider to be sufficient. Other matters remain development management decisions. What those essential facilities are and how they are judged will depend on their design and what they include. We think that going any further would be inconsistent with the NPPF, and bearing in mind any development management applications will need to comply with the current NPPF, we think that is entirely consistent and shouldn't cause any difficulties. It just means we shouldn't overprescribe at this stage. The other and more substantial disagreement between us is the university would like an additional area of almost 10 hectares to be identified as safeguarded land, and you'll see that area is identified in the hearing statement. And our position on this is, whilst we have taken on board, as you know, the likely jobs figures and the like, and the student numbers, we simply have not been provided with the evidence to justify taking land or earmarking land beyond the plan period. We haven't seen the latest investment programme, which is probably aspirational only. No study as to space efficiency in existing buildings, and we know some of these are ripe for redevelopment. Indeed, the Montague Evans case report for Campus West makes that perfectly clear as well. And this is simply a case that we are not unsympathetic to the needs of the university, but the case for safeguarding simply hasn't been made out at this stage. It's a matter for the next plan review, or if for some reason things accelerated, it would have to be very special circumstances. But certainly there isn't the justification in publicly available evidence that can be examined which would allow us to agree to safeguarding. So that's our position on that issue. And I'm happy to have Mr. Keyes speak to you briefly on the issue of space efficiency and the usage of additional land, if that would be helpful at this stage.
Yeah, I think so, please. Yes. Mr. Keyes.
Thank you. Yeah, I reiterate the point that we, obviously, the council support the growth aspirations and the economic contribution of the university. I think recognising that it's difficult to project forward, I think we have to accept that. I think our reservations are around the evidence base and to some extent around the methodology that's been adopted. So the university has sort of presented new evidence really over the last month or so based on further work they've clearly been doing. The case now is around an infrastructure investment plan which delivers some level of certainty over the next 6 years or so. Then there's an extrapolation of forecast student growth and translating that into space needs and land take. And then there's an aspiration around collaboration projects. And again, we have some concerns about the evidence we've seen around that and the approach taken. We've got a list of projects for the infrastructure investment plan. We haven't actually seen the document. It's not clear to me whether the university have looked at space utilisation in its existing state in developing those proposals. We've got a growth scenario a range between 1.5% per annum and 2% per annum. That seems to have moved on from a 1.25, 1.5 that was likely a sort of month ago. So again, I'm not sure we've seen the full evidence for that, which obviously has an implication on the future space needs and land take. And then collaboration projects, which as I understand them, are projects where the university, in terms of research and teaching, might share space with business. Again, I have a concern that there might be some double counting there because the university projected its future research and teaching needs, but also identified collaboration projects. So again, it's about really how robust is the evidence for that. The university's hearing statement talks about work that's ongoing on space utilisation, ongoing in terms of the impact of online learning. I guess my argument will be that work is really the foundation of a future projection, because it may be that the existing estate can be used more efficiently. There is some acknowledgement in the latest hearing statement that there are opportunities to intensify the use of Campus West, and there's some information been usefully provided in the latest information. There does appear to be on Plan 6 some possible development opportunities around 3.7 hectares, which I'm not clear have been factored into the overall calculation, so I think there might be more opportunity there. And again, as Mr. Elvin referenced, if we take the 23% density figure away, notwithstanding there are some design constraints and some heritage constraints, that clearly gives potentially more opportunity for some additional accommodation to be provided when certain sites are redeveloped across the campus. And on Campus West, there's clearly a number of properties on that estate which are reaching the end of their sort of economic life, and therefore I think there are obvious development opportunities, notwithstanding the heritage issues. I think it's fair to say over the last month the positions on future space needs have come much closer together, and actually the difference between what we think is required and what the university thinks required is narrowing. Reference that 3 hectares I mentioned earlier. I think from my point of view, if the university had taken a different approach, if it does take a different approach, it looks at its utilisation, it works its current estate harder, it looks at those intensification opportunities. The 23% gives more flexibility. We believe that the university can achieve its growth aspirations, make its economic contribution within the allocation that the council have made. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mr. Keys. Is there anything else from your side at this point, Mr. Elvin?
At this stage, no.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tucker.
Thank you, sir. A few things by way of overview, then I'll ask the Vice-Chancellor and perhaps Mr. Nichols just to chip in with a few additional points. If I may, I know the Vice-Chancellor is tired with respect to time, so it may be sensible to hear from him at the outset once I've made these few observations. Firstly, very grateful to the City of York, and particularly those who are sitting opposite, for the work that's been done behind the scenes over the last 6 weeks, which has led to the Statement of Common Ground. The catalyst for the discussions which have narrowed the issues between the parties... Sorry, I'm booming here for some reason. The catalyst has been essentially twofold. The first of which is the tail piece at the end of ED1 and the express recognition that landscaping and also sports and essential operations for sport and recreation could take place on land within the Greenbelt, providing it meets the requisite criteria, and we're grateful for that because that then ensures that such land can come forward. On the Statement of Common Ground, you'll see that we wanted matters to be perhaps a little more express, which could be within the explanatory memorandum, to make it absolutely clear that we're not going to have a battle any time that floodlights need to be brought forward in respect of a pitch, or that when changing facilities were proposed, that wasn't thought to be in principle objectionable. It doesn't need to be in the policy, but there needs to be some reference, given that we're dealing with proper planning for the area, and that's very much the sort of battleground that one experiences, which then wouldn't lead one to fall foul of MPPF in relation to being too specific. But that's a very minor area between us, and that's we've probably said enough as we need to on that issue. With regard to the second reason why that there has been a moving between the parties is the approach to 23% and the removal of what might have been thought to be a policy ceiling and rather a deferral to more up-to-date and more MPPF compliant approaches with respect to making efficient use of land, revisiting previously developed land, etc. We've, as you will have seen from our work, worked hard to see the extent to which there would be opportunities, mindful of that not being a policy ceiling for the future. And we think there are such opportunities that have been identified, and you've seen the information that we provided to that extent. Those two together, together with Mr. Nichols' work, based upon information from the university, has led us to sign the Statement of Common Ground, which identifies at point 1, subparagraph 4, that based on current understanding of future requirements, the area of ST27, together with the prospect of additional future development within the existing campus, will be sufficient to accommodate the probable future development needs of the university within the planned period. And that is our position. I'll ask Mr. Nichols to explain the issue in terms of the percentages in a moment, but our position is that come the end of the planned period, the development needs of the university would not end. And on the basis of the information that we have, whilst as one moves further in time, it's more difficult to be predictive with any degree of accuracy, what one can say, looking at the broad overview of the evidence, is that the university will not stop its expansion based upon current understanding, and that there is a need for what we say is a comparatively modest area of land to be identified, not released, and certainly not brought forward now, but treated as greenbelt within the planned period, but as safeguarded land, in the light of the fact that we know that the needs of the university are not going to come to the end, come the end of the 2030s. And that's why the 9.9 hectares of safeguarded land are promoted. We say that's consistent with the exercise that's facing us, i.e. paragraph 143 of MPPF, which says when defining boundaries, that one should make, that where necessary, one should be identifying areas of safeguarded land between the urban area and the green belt to meet longer term needs stretching well beyond the planned period. And it's those words, well beyond the planned period, that are the important ones, and it's essentially making provision for that. So it's a broad picture point. It's certainly not based upon any sort of detailed calculation, because frankly the probable needs, the likely needs, are known less and less as one moves forward, but certainly the picture from the University of York has been one of, we will say, astounding success, and you hear from the VC in a moment to that effect, but that they won't end in the end of the 2030s, and that there would be a need for some land to be identified rather than reliant upon very special circumstances, which for all the reasons that we've explained before is problematical. So again, grateful to the work that's been done by all parties on behind the scenes that's led to the position of the Statement of Common Ground. And just to confirm, Mr. Elvin is right that this is a Statement of Common Ground to be read together with the modifications which are appended to the Council's matter statement. So I'll just defer to the Vice-Chancellor.
If I may, thank you. And many thanks, sirs, for the opportunity to contribute to the hearing, and thanks to the King's Councils and their teams for working so hard and so well in establishing common ground. My contribution is not as an expert in planning regulations and policies, and I'll leave any technical matters to our team. My aim today is rather to say a little about the nature and the purposes of the University of York and how they relate to the need for additional space for the university's development over the local plan period, and indeed I think the same principles would apply beyond that plan period. Firstly, the nature of the university. The higher education sector is very diverse, and universities have widely different missions and do different things. University of York is a research-intensive university. And it's very easy to see universities and their space needs solely through the lens of their students. And yes, we do have over 20,000 students, and we do need the space to accommodate and teach them now and in growing numbers in the future. But in universities like ours, research has a parity of esteem with teaching. Put simply, we hire brilliant people to discover new knowledge in their subjects and to explore how that new knowledge can be applied to general benefit. And we are very good at that. Every 6 or 7 years, we have a national assessment of the quality and impact of research, and the results of the latest assessment were made available in May this year. And the University of York was placed at number 10 in the UK by research quality. That's behind only Oxford and Cambridge, the major London institutions, and behemoths like Manchester and Bristol. So the City of York has, to put it simply, one of the very best research-intensive universities in the UK. And it's for that reason that we're really popular with students nationally and internationally. Students want to come to us because of what they can learn at the cutting edge of some of the UK's very best research. And of course, to do that research requires facilities, requires space, as well as the space we need to accommodate and teach our students. Now, let me say a word now about the purposes of the University of York as a research-intensive university. To use some of the words of our founders back in the 1960s, we were set up to carry out studies, in other words, to do research, that will, I quote, contribute to the amelioration of human life and conditions. And we were set up to widen access to higher education to groups to whom it had not been available. And we were to care about that more than almost anything else. And we've synthesized those founding inspirations into a pithy phrase: the University of York exists for public good. And since I've been at the university, which is now 3 years, we have focused those purposes, that commitment to public good, on city and region, to explore how our research discoveries and their applications can give impetus to the local and regional economy, and to open up pathways for those from disadvantaged communities in city and region to have access to that more dynamic local economy through study at the university. Now, forgive me the long preamble, but that commitment to public good and its benefits for the region is why we need space to develop further now and in the future. Some examples, all of which are in collaboration with partners in the region, including and especially the City of York Council. First is the Bio-Yorkshire project, which is the flagship economic development project in the York and North Yorkshire devolution deal, seeking government investments supported by City Council, amongst other things, to build new research facilities at the University of York so we can develop the technological innovations that will hasten our transition to a zero-carbon economy. A second example, our research in fusion energy is among the best in the world and has led Goole, the town in East Riding, to be shortlisted as a potential site for the UK's first prototype fusion plant, which, if successful, will bring billions of pounds of investment into the region, with private sector startups in fusion technologies wanting to work with us to establish research facilities on our campus to take advantage of our pivotal position. Third example is that we're working closely with the hospital in York and the emerging regional NHS integrated care system to harness applications from our research in medicine and biology more fully for the benefit of the region, including new biomedical research facilities at the university. A fourth example, our research in the safety of robotic and autonomous systems, which again is an area in which we lead internationally, was right at the heart of the City Council's bid to host the headquarters of Great British Railways, on which we await an announcement, but with a vision of the city supported by our research being at the heart of rail sector innovation. And we're working with organisations like York Archaeological Trust and Screen Yorkshire to harness our research in what we call digital creativity to the appreciation of our heritage and to the creative arts. And for areas like that, and autonomous systems, and the bioeconomy, fusion energy, and healthcare technologies, we're acutely aware that we've run out of space on our campus to develop the facilities which would nurture, incubate, and grow new businesses in those fields for the economic benefit of this place and the people in it. So in all those respects, all important for the vitality of the city economy, we have growth needs so we can push ahead with the discovery of new knowledge and explore its applications. And that's what we're here for. That's what we will continue to do through this plan period and beyond. Now, students are a key part of that dynamic in three ways. Firstly, they learn about that new knowledge and take it with them into their careers. And they're more likely to stay in York and do so for the local economy's benefit if we can build flourishing economic sectors in those fields. There's a virtuous circle there that we are trying to construct. We're also working in various ways with partners in city and region to open up pathways for those in our most disadvantaged communities to enter higher education and benefit from those flourishing economic sectors. There is an inclusion element here, which I think is crucially important. And third, students from elsewhere, nationally and internationally, will want to come to York because of the strength, the excitement, the vitality of its research and the impact of the applications of that research. If I have a moment more, I understand that you, sirs, wanted me to say a little bit about student demand and numbers over the coming years, what I expect to see. I anticipate that sector demand for higher education in the UK will be high and will increase in the coming years, both nationally and internationally. Within the UK, we have a demographic bulge. That's going to create more demand for higher education. Internationally, the UK higher education sector's reputation is really strong, and that draws students to the UK. And we also know that there are vast demographic bulges in some parts of the world, in particular South Asia and Africa, which are going to produce demand for higher education which cannot be met in those countries, and a good part of that will turn to the UK. And because of our very strong reputation as a research-intensive university, we expect to see, for those reasons, because of those drivers, increases in demand at the University of York. But I also anticipate that the numbers admitted will lag behind the growth in demand. We will not simply respond in a linear way to that growth in demand. In part because the impact of inflation on the frozen level of UK undergraduate fees means that we will need to manage demand to be able to afford to deliver teaching at high quality. And in part because I think we'll see some element of online provision growing to meet demand from new markets. I think those who can afford it will want to come here and study here in person, but I think there will be growing provision for those markets through online degree programs. So with that, I anticipate that our growth in student numbers in the coming years may be less than that we have seen in the past years. So to summarise, we do need provision, we do need space to grow to meet that continuing and growing student demand, to enable the development of new future-oriented areas of research and the technological innovations that flow from that, but also to fulfil our commitment to public good in the region, to anchor the economic benefits of our research, of our graduates, and of our pathways for access to university for the benefit of city and community in and around York. Thank you for the opportunity to address you.
As intimated, sirs, the Vice-Chancellor is leaving. He's got other things on his time, so if there were questions that you... exciting as this programme is, of course, if there were specific questions that needs to be raised, then he's here for a period of time. So I don't know if you want to hear Mr Nichols in relation to this, or whether that's the point you want to delve into in terms of expansion of the case in a few moments.
Yeah, we'll hear from Mr Nichols now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm going to run over the evidence that's been pulled together in relation to university need, and along the way pick up some of the points that have been raised by Mr Keyes as well, if I may. I think I'm going to start off by emphasising the point about uncertainty. I think it's common ground between all the parties that to predict precisely the university's needs for a period up to 2038 is all but impossible. So the evidence that's been presented does have a range of numbers in terms of rates of growth, and to some extent the degree to which those rates of growth and things like student numbers will translate into space needs. So we don't make any apology for that. There is a degree of uncertainty, albeit in all cases the forecasts are for strong growth. It's a question of how strong that growth is, how quickly it happens over the planned period. The evidence has moved on since the universities first started addressing this in 2018. And again, we don't make any apologies for that. The world has changed. Obviously, we've had COVID. That's impacting on universities as many other sectors of the economy. But perhaps importantly, as the Vice-Chancellor has outlined, the university has a new 10-year strategy. It's recently developed its integrated infrastructure plan, and it's been starting to look in some detail at its estate and how it can better use that. And there is ongoing work in relation to that, as Mr Keyes referred to. So the evidence that now is presented is an update, and it does build on some of the previous evidence, but in many respects is a better reflection of where the university is now and where it's heading. In trying to assess the needs going ahead, we've split it into three elements. If you like, the known knowns, that's the integrated infrastructure plan and projects which the university knows about and is planning for now, and where it can plan where those needs could be accommodated on its existing Campus East and Campus West. Now, I know Mr Keyes has asked about the integrated infrastructure plan, and the university has offered to share that on a confidential basis with officers in the council if they want to see the detail, but it's not something that's suitable for sharing in the public domain. The second strand is then looking at growth beyond the period of the integrated infrastructure plan, so roughly an 8 to 10 year period to the end of the local plan period. And in order to do that, we have to have some sort of basis for doing that. And as with previous evidence, we've used scenarios for growth, which are focused on growth in student numbers, but as the Vice-Chancellor has made it clear, growth will equally importantly be in the research aspects of the university. And the two are linked together, but they're not entirely the same thing. For purposes of that forecasting exercise, previously there was a very wide range from, I think, less than 1% to 4% per annum. We've now narrowed that to a range of 1.5% to 2% per annum, which is described in the needs paper as a reasonable basis for planning. It's not saying that that's what's going to happen, but the university considers that's a reasonable basis for trying to work out its space requirements over the next, certainly to the end of the plan period. And then the third element is collaboration projects, and again the Vice-Chancellor has very much brought out the importance of that and what the opportunities are. Very difficult to forecast with any certainty exactly what they'll be and what their space requirements will be. We've had, university has had its best stab at that, but we have to accept those are illustrative figures, and they depend on a number of things happen, but they reflect the research strengths of the university and where there are likely to be strong opportunities for collaboration. And when we talk about collaboration, this is essentially private sector businesses working with the university, setting up businesses, expanding businesses, working with academics on campus. And some of that collaboration requires space on campus. And so the exercise makes an allowance for what would be reasonable levels of that collaboration activity based on the strengths that the Vice-Chancellor has outlined. So those three strands are added together, and that gives an overall assessment of the possible space requirements for the university up to the end of the plan period. That's in square metres net gross internal area, but obviously ultimately this plan is about areas of land, and so in order to translate those needs into land take requirements, the planning assumption has been to continue to use a 23% figure of the footprint and roughly assumption of about 3 stories height for buildings on that footprint. Now, clearly, there is now flexibility potentially in policy on the 23%, at least on part of the university's estate. But the 3 stories, again, it's a planning assumption. It's not certain that it's possible to achieve that. That will depend at the level of the buildings on individual constraints, etc. And others in the team can obviously talk about that. But that's the planning assumption that's been made for convenience to convert that space into land requirements. And that's the starting point in terms of assessing need, and that's summarised in the table in the paper on table 4 on page 9 in a response to MIQ 2.1. And as you'll see, the overall space ranges depending on whether the growth rate assumed or the density development per extra student, but somewhere between 135, 167,000 square metres of space to the end of the plan period. That's over and above the known projects which are identified in figures 4 and 5 that the university supplied in their hearing statement. And that translates potentially into a range of 19 to 23 hectares of extra land based on that assumption that I've described. Now, the university recognises that that growth requirement can be met in a number of ways, partly in terms of intensification and redevelopment of Campus West, partly by looking at capacity to fill up existing Campus East, and partly by looking at its own estate and seeking efficiencies in terms of use of its own estate, which is constrained by the nature of a number of the buildings that exist and the practicalities of redeveloping them. So we do address on Campus West, an exercise has been carried out, which is shown in the plans, looking at individual sites that could be used to accommodate the known projects. And in addition, there are the sites that Mr. Keyes refers to, which amount to about 3.7 hectares, which are shown on Plan 6, where there's no end use identified at the moment, but they're described as opportunity sites. And actually, the capacity of those sites has been taken into account in the exercise. It's explained in paragraph 52 and 57 of our response to MIQ 2.1. It should be pointed out that one of the sites, that's the peninsula site on in Plan 6, is a redevelopment possibility of a site where there's existing buildings, so it's not a matter of just filling up an empty site. The second site, too, is a car park, which is subject to, again, a number of planning constraints. And site 3 is a site on Campus East, which is an infill site where there are fewer constraints. And based on an initial estimate, those 3 sites could deliver around about 13,000 square metres of space, and that's been taken into account in assessing the net need for additional land going forward. So we have factored those sites in. It's possibly not clear in the early evidence that Mr. Keys saw, but those have been factored in. The second thing I mentioned is about the potential for efficiencies in the use of the existing estate of the university, and some initial work has been carried out looking at the possibilities for improving efficiency in terms of use of space by the professional services staff, so that's sort of effectively the support staff to the university. And initial work suggests that it might be possible to improve efficiency by about 40%, which would lead to about 12,000 square metres of effective space that could be retrieved or reallocated to the university over the plan period. So that work has also been factored into account in looking at the scope for efficiencies in the existing estate. That's very early stages work. It's not, in the bag. It's not necessarily going to happen, but it's indicative of the sort of efficiencies that could be achieved on the existing estate. It should be said that in terms of the redevelopment of Campus West, the new buildings that have been designed to replace existing stock are obviously based on new space standards and more efficient ways of working. So the redevelopment already takes that into account. So drawing those strands together, it's summarised in the paper on pages 12 and 13. We've got table 5, which shows the situation where if you like, there's no ability to find further capacity on Campus East and Campus West or in the existing stock, and that shows that the proposed allocation ST27 wouldn't be sufficient to meet the forecast needs of the university. But when we take account of those extra sites that are available for development and potential for space efficiencies, which delivers between them potentially about 25,000 square metres of extra capacity. The table 6 shows the results of that exercise, and you can see that if the university were to grow by 1.5% per annum beyond the integrated infrastructure plan period, roughly speaking, the capacity of ST27 as assessed by the university, which is 15.3 net developable area, would be sufficient for the university's needs to the end of the plan period, but not beyond. However, were the university to grow at a faster rate beyond the IAP period, growth rate of 2% per annum for students, that allocation wouldn't be sufficient for the university's needs, or put it another way, it would reach its capacity before the end of the plan period. So it depends on the actual rate of the growth of the university and a number of the other assumptions that we've talked about. And I think the university can't say with confidence exactly where it will be by 2038, but these numbers show that it would be tight with just ST27 based on the assumptions, and it's quite possible that the site wouldn't be sufficient if the university grows the upper end of the range that it's described as a reasonable basis for planning. So hopefully that's set out the university's case, and I think I've answered most of Mr. Key's points. There's one other point. He did raise the question about double counting between collaboration and R&D. The collaboration projects, the space there is based on largely private sector collaborators coming in and operating on the university campus. So it's private sector employment in sort of science park type activities. So it would be additional, there may be a little bit of overlap, we can't be certain, but it's largely additional to the university's own needs for its own research facilities. And I guess a final point, and this is, I think, has been mentioned before, that if the university were to reach at or close to its capacity in terms of the land it has available with certainty, when it's putting forward bids for projects, large collaboration projects, research bids, it needs to have certainty that it has access to the land, and putting forward a case for very special circumstances for moving into part of the Greenbelt isn't satisfactory, because the timetables for that are not conducive to being able to land some of these major projects. And I think we make the point in the needs paper that the nuclear fusion project the Vice-Chancellor spoke about, which is a very large opportunity, if the university didn't have the potential to house that on Campus East, which it does at the moment, it simply wouldn't have even got past first base in terms of being able to put that comprehensive and credible bid together. So that certainty in terms of access to land to allow for expansion and for major research and collaboration bids is really important to the university in terms of its planning and ability to land some of these major opportunities.
Thank you, sirs.
Briefly, sir, a large proportion of what the university has said we do not dispute. We certainly don't dispute the university's plans, as the Vice-Chancellor has explained. However, as is abundantly clear from what you've been told, you are dealing with significant uncertainties at the end of the plan period and beyond. This does not demonstrate a plan which, as proposed to be modified, would be unsound. It's important. I perfectly understand the collaboration issue, and as someone who's been advising on the expansion of similar facilities in Cambridge, I understand what the issues are. But the having the allocation and nothing else is a discipline which ought to be applied to the university to ensure that it operates effectively with regard to its existing estate and isn't profligate with ST27 in order to protect the Green Belt. We well understand the need to have space available, but you don't have collaboration demand picture at the moment. This is aspiration, not current situation. Similarly, matters such as bids for the fusion project. Again, we're dealing with very early stages with such matters. We are not unsympathetic to the university's position. Indeed, we accept the importance and the need of the university. We just do not consider that the evidence is yet sufficiently clear to warrant, in the absence of proper space utilisation studies and plans for existing estate, that the university requires safeguarded land in the future. It's quite clear, and no disrespect to Mr. Nicol, he is not an educational space standards expert, he's an economist. I understand the points that he makes, but the university just has not worked yet sufficiently on the need and space utilisation side of the equation sufficiently yet. We're talking, as we know from the agreed statement, about something beyond the planned period. As I've said, the City Council is far from unsympathetic to the university's needs and will continue to keep such matters under review, but now is not the time to start safeguarding additional land with those uncertainties currently there. ST27 will provide a significant amount of additional space. This, with the greater flexibility for development elsewhere on the campus, should give the university sufficient flexibility for the foreseeable future. As for material that was offered on a confidential basis, we took the view that that was inappropriate. It has to be available for a public examination if it's going to be relevant, and indeed for discussion in council with members. We can't look at matters on a confidential basis. We need to be able to examine it and to report to members on these matters. They're entitled to see what it is they're being asked to do. So, in summary, as I say, we are very sympathetic to the needs of the university, but what has been said to you this morning doesn't go to soundness. As for the wording at the end of ED1, well, I've made my point about that. Mr. Tucker refers to floodlighting. Well, he may be right, but that will depend on design and issues coming forward when such matters are proposed, if they're proposed. That can all be determined in the context of the NPPF and the ED1 policy. There's nothing there to constrain it other than general principles which would constrain it anyway under the NPPF. So no one is saying no to floodlighting, but it will need to be approached sensitively. Design, etc., will have to be looked at as and when it comes forward. I've got nothing then to add. Thank you. I'm grateful to the university. I don't know whether Mr. Keyes wants just to add anything on the figures side.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Elvin. We probably don't want to get into a detailed conversation about numbers, just a couple of observations. Obviously, on the range that the university presented, at the upper end of the range, numerically, there's a case for greater land allocation. At the lower end of the range, there isn't. I think our position would be that we've previously looked at 1.5% per annum because in the previous evidence that was submitted, that was described as lightly. And also, if you look at the space standards that have been applied, the so-called higher space standard doesn't assume any economies of scale in adding space to an existing campus. And I think fundamentally there should be a recognition that there are economies of scale benefits. So I would dismiss the higher space standard in my calculation of space needed, and 1.5% and the lower, medium or low space requirements means that our allocation on the university's numbers is sufficient. On the question of collaboration space, which I think clearly is a very important aspect and recognised so by the university in terms of the city economic contribution and the regional contribution, on the allocation that we've made, I think it's more than possible in planning the estate to always have land available for projects that may be subject to bids or subject to competition. So I think it's more than possible to retain land sufficient for those types of projects. And again, on the university's numbers, I think their number is 33,000 square metres out of 100,000 square metres. So it's a relatively small proportion of the total, and I think could be accommodated, and land could be held back for those sorts of projects, which I recognise that if you had to go through a greenbelt release, that would cause you difficulties. But I think in planning the estate, you could accommodate for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keyes. Mr. Tucker, is there anything that you want to come back on?
Yeah, if I can just come back on a couple of points. Just dealing with Mr. Keyes' point about the 1.5%, it's absolutely right to say that was referred to in our previous evidence of likely. You'll recall that previous evidence also identified two other realistic scenarios. They're described as realistic scenarios. Those were 2% and 4%. And again, I'm booming. I'm not sure why. So it's certainly not the case that we were saying likely and everything beyond that is unlikely. That's not what we put forward. We're dealing with a predictive exercise. So that's the first thing. And as Mr. Nichols has put matters, the 2% is put forward as being a reasonable basis for planning. And that's quite deliberate words. In terms of paragraph 143C, our position is, as you will see from the table on page 13, that come the end of the plan period, ST27 will be all but used up, whereas you have a clear evidence base to show that there is an upward trajectory in terms of growth, and the intention of government is as to whether or not, when fixing greenbelt boundaries, there is not a need to review them in the longer term, and that they should endure well beyond the plan period. On the evidence before you, and we accept the difficulties of the predictive exercise that we're engaged in, there would be a need to review before the end of the plan period, which is why the additional area which we had hitherto been promoted as an allocation, we think is best approached as safeguarded land so as to protect the inner boundary of the Greenbelt. And certainly, if my clients came forward with profligate proposals, to use my learned French language, I suspect the City of York may have something to say about it. But that's also for development management.
I don't think I need to say much more other than to say, as a predictive exercise, it lacks one major element, which would go to the issue of soundness if it existed, which is a space utilisation study which explained how York's existing assets could best be used. That has yet to be done. What Mr. Tucker says is all very well, but unfortunately, without a key element of the exercise, the assessments that are being made about the scope for future expansion and intensification on the existing estate is simply a broad, very, very broad exercise, and it just doesn't go to soundness. And safeguarding is all very well, but we're talking about issues that are going to change over the next 10 years, if not the longer period of the local plan. Collaboration, remote learning, all those issues, who knows where we're going to be in 10 years' time. That added to the uncertainty of the university's position, in my respectful submission, says this is a matter for review, not for the soundness of the current plan.
Thank you for that, Mr. Griffiths, and I think that we have that clearly in our minds, what is agreed, what isn't, and the various cases for each of those two parties. So what I'm going to do now then is, as I promised at the outset, and to take a step back and look more fundamentally at this, if I can put it that way. And I suppose the starting point for that really is arguments against the inclusion of the proposed allocation at all. So who is here to address us today on that fundamental point? Yes. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I can't see your nameplate at all. My apologies, Mr. Langler. My eyesight has failed me once again, but I suspect that the comments that you want to make might well be a good starting point for the exploration of more fundamental points. So if I can start with you.
Thank you, sir. I mean, our point very much relates to matter 2.10, so in relation to the Greenbelt. So just to make quite clear, our concerns regarding site ST27 relate solely to the potential harm caused by its development on the Greenbelt, and specifically Greenbelt Purpose 4, so the special character and setting of the historic city, based very much on the work that the Council have done in identifying those character elements that are important to the city and those that relate to Greenbelt Purpose 4, specifically in this location, landscape and setting and the compactness of the city. Our statement that we submitted in relation to the Phase 4 hearings sort of captures all of our argument, if you like, in regards to the Greenbelt. But we specifically wanted to say that previous inspectors have highlighted that the historic city in relation to Greenbelt need not only be referred to as the walled city. It's also more generally the form and character and size of the city itself, the wider city. And also that, previous inspectors as well have highlighted that, that purpose 4 is relevant in this location. Obviously, the most sort of recent being the called-in public inquiry for the Campus East development, where whilst the inspector concluded that that purpose 4 was not sorry, just check my that purpose 4 did not conflict. Sorry, the proposals did not conflict with purpose 4 in that case. That was only on the basis that a substantial swathe of greenbelt land would be retained between the A64 and the application site. Now, clearly, ST24 or any larger or variation of that site within this location would clearly be eating into that substantial swathe of greenbelt land, which is currently retained and which currently, when you travel around the A64, gives you a very good understanding of that compactness of the city and of a city that is contained within the ring road.
If I can ask, just ask you to amplify a little then. Is your point, just so that I'm understanding it correctly, that the allocation is in the wrong place somehow?
We, at the publication stage, suggested that, yes, the allocation is in the wrong place because of the conflict with the Greenbelt, and that all other options to accommodate that land should be explored, including a site that I believe it's ST4 to the north of the university, which is very well related, as a potential option for expansion of university uses. I mean, I don't want to kind of overstate our case on this because obviously the balance of need against releasing land from the Greenbelt is not really within our remit to sort of go too far into that. Our remit is quite clearly the historic environment. And in this case, it's relation to the Greenbelt rather than any specific designated heritage asset within the area.
That's very helpful, Mr. Langler, thank you.
If I can just ask, 'cause I don't think that the council will argue with you that Purpose 4 is engaged in consideration of this. So does it boil down then to a straightforward difference in professional judgment?
I think it's highlighting a concern in terms of, in relation to this site and the Greenbelt and the impact on the special character and setting of the historic city. I wouldn't go any further than that. I have to say, it's fairly unusual for Historic England to comment on the Greenbelt, but obviously in relation to York, it's quite clear that Purpose 4 is the sort of the primary purpose, if you like, for the city. So we felt that this was a kind of a unique case, and in this location, we felt that the views were strong enough to appear and put our point across at the examination. But I fully understand that the kind of as I say, that balancing exercise between the need for the expansion of the university, something that we wouldn't have any issues with in any other kind of location. But obviously, in this specific location, we have concerns in relation to the Greenbelt and the historic character and setting of the city.
Mrs. Hilton.
Thank you. I suppose what I'm thinking about is that the ST27 is something that we oppose for the similar reasons and others that have been put forward in our hearing statement. But also the suggested safeguarded land is just a further existential threat to Heslington Village. Heslington Village is a conservation area, and that's been quite rightly noted. But it's also a boundary that separates York City from the countryside. And that needs to be preserved and And clearly the area around Heslington Village needs to be different from a parkland, a sports field, or other facilities which may be permitted in a green belt, because otherwise you totally lose that demarcation of the difference between urban and rural. So that's one point I wanted to make. I mean, there are so many points. I've got a long hearing statement with additional notes here, but I just want to pick up first on things that have been said this morning. So we've had Mr. Keyes commenting on encouraging the university to relook at the existing estates, and we would fully support that. We've had Mr. Tucker saying that the likely needs are known less and less as one moves forward. We've had Mr. Nichols for the university saying there's uncertainty in the data. Mrs. O'Neill in her hearing statement pointing out that priorities shift over time. But they all, apart from possibly Mr. Keyes and CYC, are assuming that everything will move to be bigger and greater. That isn't a concrete assumption. That isn't an assumption with any evidence behind it. On the contrary, the evidence for the university needs, if you look at the science park usage now, for example, and I dare say you went over this last week when we couldn't be present, there are lots and lots of firms registered on the science park which don't need to be on the science park, and they don't need to be on the university site. I've got a list. If you want, I can read some out, or I can give you the list. But, for example, Hempwell Limited, retail of cannabis products, an architect's firm, a patient support firm, IT4 Home Limited, a landscape architects. That's only the first few. There's a whole other page of them, which I won't go through. But it seems to those living in the area that there's a lot more STEM activity that could go on within the existing science park without urban sprawl into the green belt, which is what S27 would be. Moreover, it looks as if there is already in hand a plan to move science park activities from Campus West onto Campus East into the large empty space which is to the east of the lake, to the north and east of the lake, which is fine. I mean, I think Heslington Parish Council would feel they should be filling up all of the Campus East site, everything, before any consideration of building outside the boundaries of Campus East is even thought about. So it looks like the kind of intentions of ST27 are already being developed on Campus East. And it's unclear why they need the additional hectares, I think it's 21 hectares, is it? To expand further. I'm sure they'll come up with numbers. I don't have the numbers to hand. But I think the question mark is why they really need to have more land and why they can't use the land they've got even more intensively than perhaps they're considering. We said in phase 3, when we was talking about student accommodation, that this should not be a both-and scenario. We're not saying, yes, of course, you can intensify building in Campus East and also develop ST27. We're saying, do not develop ST27. Do not have that allocation, but use the land that you've got or find sites elsewhere for parts of university business or other businesses that don't need to be co-located with the university. When it comes to Greenbelt, I don't know if you want to go on to talk about the Greenbelt aspect straight away, or right? Okay. We had an interesting discussion last week about the inner Greenbelt boundaries, and it occurred to us that logically, the Greenbelt, far from being traced along Low Lane, which is the southern perimeter of Campus East at the moment, that actually the Greenbelt should, in all reality, follow the line of the built environment, which is what CYC said its intention is. And therefore, all of the lake and the green buffer areas which separate off Heslington and Badger Hill from Campus East should be in the green